To understand how big this firing was, you have to understand who got fired. His name was Terry Brown. And for about 10 years, Terry Brown was the fourth member of Rush. Now, Rush was a trio: Geddy Lee on bass, vocals, and keyboards, Alex Lifeson on guitar, and Neil Peart on drums. Three of the most talented musicians in rock history. But behind the glass in the control room, there was a fourth guy. And Geddy Lee said it himself. He flat out called Terry Brown the fourth member of the band. That's not a small thing to say. These three guys were famously tight, and they trusted each other completely. For them to let an outsider into that circle and call them one of their own, that man had to be special. And he really was. Terry Brown produced almost every classic Rush record you can name. Fly By Night, 2112, A Farewell to Kings, Hemispheres, Permanent Waves, and the big one, Moving Pictures. Now here's the thing about the Terry Brown sound. It was warm. It was organic. It felt like real human beings playing real instruments in a real room. The guitars, they had teeth. The drums had air around them. Even when the songs got complicated and very complex, and Rush songs got really complicated, with all those time changes and long instrumental parts, Brown kept the sound natural, alive. He was the guy who could take three musicians showing off at the highest level and make it sound like a song instead of a math test. And that's a rare gift. And it all built up to 1981, Moving Pictures. That album was the mountaintop. You had Tom Sawyer, Limelight, Red Barchetta, YYZ, just to name a few. It's the record that turned Rush from a cult band into superstars, and it's sold by the truckload. It still sells today. For a lot of fans, it's the greatest thing the band ever did, so you think they'd be thrilled, right? I mean, mission accomplished. They found the formula. Now just keep doing it. But that's exactly what scared the band. Because here's a trap that destroys great bands. When you have your biggest hit, the safe move is to make that same record or song over and over. Give the people what they want, right? Don't rock the boat. But Rush looked at that safe road and they saw a dead end instead. They didn't want to be the band that peaked in 1981 and spent the next 30 to 40 years playing the hits. They were terrified of getting comfortable. To them, comfort wasn't a reward, it was a cage. And the man who built that comfortable, beautiful, warm sound, he was about to become their problem. So now we get to 1982. Signals was the album. So to understand what happened, you have to understand what was going on in the music industry at the time. The whole world was changing. New wave was taking over. You had synthesizers everywhere. I mean, bands like Human League and Ultravox and Howard Jones, and there were 100 others ditching that big guitar sound for cold electronic textures. It was the sound of the future, and it was the sound of the radio. And Geddy Lee fell in love with it. He started leaning hard into synthesizers. Keyboards, they weren't just a decoration or just for texture anymore. They were moving to the front. They were becoming the main event. On songs like Subdivisions, it's not the guitar that hits you first, it's that haunting, pumping synth line. And this is where the trouble started, because Terry Brown, he was a guitar guy. His whole philosophy, his whole sound was built on that warm guitar forward attack. That was his religion. And now the band, especially Geddy, they wanted to push that guitar back and let the machines take over. So you could probably feel that collision coming. I mean, the flashpoint was the song Digital Man. The band and Brown, they got into it over how the track should sound, the mix, the feel, the whole direction of it. Terry Brown wanted one thing and the band wanted another thing. And for the first time in 10 years, they couldn't get on the same page. So think about how strange that must have felt. For a decade, this man could read their minds. He knew what they wanted before they did. And now suddenly they were speaking different languages. He was pulling towards that warm, rich rock sound that made them famous. And they were pulling towards something colder, newer, and stranger. And here's the heavy part, the psychological part. The band started to realize something painful. Their mentor, the guy who taught them, who shaped them, who loved them, was now holding them back. He wasn't doing anything on purpose with any malice. And he wasn't sabotaging them either. He was just being himself. He was being the same brilliant guy he'd always been. But that sound that they wanted and the sound that they were chasing, the sound of the 1980s, that lived in a place that Terry Brown didn't want to go to. And the very thing that made him great, his rock solid vision, it turned into an anchor. I mean, every time they tried to sail towards the future, that anchor kept pulling them back to 1981. So you can imagine the dread that comes with that realization, because it means you have a choice. And neither choice is a good one. So they made the call. After Signals, Rush and Terry Brown went their separate ways. Now, to be clear, this was a firing, the most important working relationship of their careers, 10 years deep, and they ended it. It wasn't over money, not over a fight, not because anyone was a bad guy. They ended it because they refused to stop growing. And that's what makes this one of the coldest, most ruthless decisions in rock history. Not cruel by any stretch, just cold. I mean, the band put the art ahead of their friendship, and they decided that being great mattered more to them than being comfortable, even if it meant cutting loose the man who was practically family to them. Most bands can't do that. Actually, most people can't do that. Loyalty, it's a powerful thing. It's a lot easier to keep the old friend around and slowly fade out together than it is to look that friend in the eye and say, we've got to do this without you now. Rush did the hard thing. And the second they did it, they hit the gas in the other direction. I mean, listen to the early records. They're stripped back, they're raw, three guys and their instruments captured honestly. Now listen to what came right after the split. The albums got dense, packed with layers, loaded with keyboard and MIDI and electronic textures stacked on top of each other. They deliberately buried the old sound. They took the warm, organic Rush that millions of people loved, and they tore it down to the studs on purpose too. And the fans, they didn't know what to make of it. I mean, lots of them hated the synths. I could take it or leave it, but a lot of the hardcore early and older fans, they were purists and they felt betrayed. It looked to a lot of people like Rush was throwing away the very thing that made them special. There was real backlash. Where were the guitars? Where was the warmth? Where was the band they fell in love with? I mean, critics had their opinions too. And to a chunk of the audience, it looked like Rush was throwing away the very thing that made them special. But that was the whole point. Rush would rather risk losing fans than turn into a nostalgia act. They'd rather chase a sound and fall on their face than keep recreating Tom Sawyer record after record. They were willing to be wrong. They just weren't willing to stand still. And that takes a spine that most bands and most artists simply don't have. And here's where I want to be fair to Terry Brown, because he deserves it. It would have been easy to tell this story like he was just some old-fashioned guy who got left behind. But that's not the truth at all. Everything that made Rush legendary, the precision, the tightness, the jaw-dropping musicianship that holds up perfectly 40 years later, that came from Terry Brown. He was the disciplinarian. He was the guy who demanded that they get it exactly right. He pushed three incredible players to be even sharper than they were on their own. I mean, that technical perfection people worship Rush for, Terry Brown helped carve it into them. And his work didn't just survive, it became the gold standard. To this day, producers and engineers, they go back to those Brown era Rush records and they study them. I mean, moving pictures in particular gets treated like a textbook. Modern producers, guys working right now with all the technology that they have in the world, they still point to those records and they say, that is how you do it. That's how a rock record is supposed to sound. It's reference material. It's a measuring stick. And that's the wild part of this story. The man who got fired for being behind the times and his records ended up outlasting the trends that replaced him. And here's something else his departure created. Once Brown was gone, Rush became a band of wanderers. They started producer hopping, album after album. The new name behind the glass: Peter Henderson, Peter Collins, Rupert Hine. They kept changing collaborators. They kept chasing new sounds, kept reinventing themselves through that whole experimental mid-career stretch. That restless phase only happened because they cut the cord in 1982. As long as Terry Brown was the fourth member, there was a center of gravity, one steady voice. Once that voice was gone, the band was free to roam, and roam they did for the rest of the decade. So what's the real lesson buried in all of this? It's a hard one. And it's not just about music, because sometimes partnerships, they have to come to an end. Not because they failed, because they succeeded too well. There comes a point where being the thing that made you great becomes the thing that keeps you the same. And for a creative spirit, that's a slow death. Rush, they understood that. They understood that loyalty, as beautiful as it is, can quietly turn into a trap. And they chose evolution over loyalty, even when it broke their hearts to do so. Now look at the scoreboard. Most of Rush's peers, the big bands, they came up along with, they faded. They became nostalgia acts. They spent their later years playing their old hits to the crowds who only wanted those old hits. The music was stuck in place, and it was frozen in the year of their biggest record. Rush didn't do that. Rush didn't freeze. Rush kept moving. They kept staying relevant, moving forward, and they became creative for 4 full decades. They earned a level of respect almost no band reaches, right up to the very end. And the foundation of all that survival was laid in 1982, when they were willing to do the unthinkable and let their mentor go. So that's why I'd argue that firing Terry Brown is one of the most important decisions in the entire history of progressive rock. It's not the most famous one, it's not the loudest, but maybe the most important, because it's the moment Rush cared more about the future than the past. The cold sacrifice. That's what it was. They gave up something they loved to become something more. 2 parties, no villains, a producer who built a legend, and a band brave enough to walk away from the very sound that he helped give them. They were 3 musicians and a 4th member who made some of the greatest music ever recorded. And the day they stopped working together might just be the day they guaranteed that they'd never be forgotten. That music, it still sounds immortal. But the decision behind it was all too human. So if you're a Rush fan, you can check out my latest or most recent video listing my top 10 deep cuts from their amazing catalog. You can click on a thumbnail. It looks like this. And if you got something out of this video today and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please hit the subscribe and like buttons, because there's more rock history coming from me. And tell me in the comments below, was firing Terry Brown a stroke of genius, or did Rush lose their piece of their soul when he walked out that door and I'll see you in the next one.